Καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλο ένα επεισόδιο του It's a Dog Friendly Podcast. Σήμερα θα έχουμε μαζί μας την Ann Baslington Davies, λέκτορας του Πανεπιστημίου του Bishop Barton και ερευνήτρια πάνω στην επιθετικότητα των σκύλων. Κάντε λίγο υπομονή με τα αγγλικά μου μόνο. Hi Ann, thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
How would you define aggression?
That's a really good question. One of the problems that we've got when we're trying to study aggression, if you look in the literature, is that there are so many definitions of aggression. Are we thinking of a dog that lunges and barks and bites? Or are we just thinking of a dog that tenses up? There are so many different definitions of aggression in the literature. That was one of the really difficult things that we had to consider when we were trying to do this research. What we ended up deciding in the research I've just been doing is that we went for bite, because aggression is such a wide-ranging thing, but the bit that most people are interested in is that dog going to bite? So we kind of stuck to that as being an easier way to define it. But aggression, yeah, what is aggression? A lot of the literature doesn't define it. It's very difficult to actually pick on one thing.
Barking, growling or lunging are aggression or are distance increasing signals aim at de-escalate the situation?
Yeah, again, that is one of those areas that's quite tricky to unpick, because a distance increasing behaviour might be seen as aggressive. If you want somebody to go away, you might shout at them. It's an aggressive response because you're feeling uncertain and you would like some more distance and you want that person to go away. And dogs are just the same. So a lot of aggression arises from some kind of frustration. So either they want more distance and they're not getting it, or they want a particular resource and they're not getting it, or they want something else and they're not getting it. And that frustration tends to spill over into what we perceive as an aggressive response.
Many people think aggression is mainly about dominance. What does modern science say about that?
Well, the dominance theory in dogs has long since been debunked, so I would certainly say that if you are employing a dog trainer who talks about dominance, don't find yourself a different trainer. Dominance theory in dogs said that dogs live in a hierarchical pack. They don't. We know that. We have done studies on, well, not me personally, studies have been done on free roaming dogs, so dogs that aren't living in a home environment. And studies on free roaming dogs, which is the closest thing we've got to a wild domesticated dog. Obviously those two things don't sort of sit well together. They show that dogs live in kind of loosely affiliated groups. They don't have a dominance hierarchy. They don't have a principal breeding pair. And this idea of dominance arose from studies done in the 50s, looking at bunches of captive wolves who were unrelated and forced to live in a confined environment. And there was lots of fighting, and there was lots of sort of what was interpreted as dominance behaviour. The person who did those studies has since said he was mistaken, and actually wild wolves don't even live like that. They do live in a pack. They do have sort of mum and dad at the top of the pack, and the rest of the pack are usually cubs of 1 or 2 years worth of litters. Other animals do live in a dominance hierarchy, so chickens and chimpanzees, definitely. Dogs, no. So the idea of dominance in dogs, it's a fallacy really, and it's quite unhelpful when people go, the dog's aggressive because he's trying to be dominant. No, he's not. He's being aggressive maybe because he's afraid, maybe because you've got something or another dog's got something that he really wants. There are different reasons for aggression, but not dominance.
To what extent does fear underline aggressive behavior in dogs? The link between fear and aggression is well documented, and more recent research suggests that aggressive behavior often stems from fear. Is this correct?
Yes, it is. Quite a lot of the time, fear is a root cause of aggression. Although, again, we can say that perhaps that's also another form of frustration. If your goal is to get another animal to go away from you, and that goal is frustrated because the other animal isn't doing that, then an aggressive response might be the way that our dog may choose to oblige another animal to go away. So And that can be often seen as, in cases where a dog is afraid, just like people really. If people are afraid, they tend to lash out, they tend to respond with aggression. Dogs have the same kind of response. I think it helps if you have a dog that's behaving aggressively, you can think, well, what is he afraid of? What's he not coping with? Often we see it as something bad dog, and it's not. Think of it as a dog that's not coping. The dog's got some concerns. He's finding his environment difficult to handle. That can often flip the way we might treat aggressive responses in dogs.
To what extent do genetic factors influence the expression of aggression, and how large is the contribution of the environment? Is a dog that has inherited genes associated with aggression destined to become aggressive?
That's a really interesting question. So when we're thinking about behaviour, there isn't a gene that definitely codes for a specific behaviour. We can't open our dog up and go, here's the gene for aggression. We can't do that. It's likely to be the interplay of several genes, if indeed aggression is controlled genetically. And that's still a question that's being debated. We don't really have a firm answer for that. You did ask about the environment. We do know that that's extremely important, and that dogs that are brought up in impoverished environments or ones where they are unlikely to encounter the things that they need to encounter in daily life, like people and vacuum cleaners and cars and other dogs, if they don't have that experience early on in their life, then they tend to be more likely to develop aggressive responses because they're afraid. They're encountering novelty. When we think about dogs who have parents who display aggressive behaviour, the question is that an inherited component if our dog becomes aggressive, or is it a learned behaviour? Have they learnt that response to respond aggressively, say, to their owner? Have they learnt that response because they've watched their parents do it, or their mum do it, or have they somehow inherited that tendency? And that's a question we don't really have a very clear answer to. However, my advice to anybody who is looking to get a dog would be see the parents, both of the parents preferably, see what their temperament is like, see how they are with people, ask lots of questions, and that gives your dog the best start. But the environment then needs to be the sort that the dog is going to thrive in. And you can't just take the dog, and put it in a completely different environment and hope that all will be well. Really, dogs need to be introduced to the environment that they're going to live in from a very young age.
So is it correct to say that environmental factors can influence which genes are expressed or silenced through epigenetic mechanisms?
Yes, to some extent. If animals are, not just dogs, if animals are exposed to specific stimuli in their environment at a correct stage, when they are genetically prepared to respond to that stimuli, you may well find a behaviour is expressed that might not otherwise have been developed. There are some interesting studies looking at the development of predation activities in dogs. There was one lovely study where a man introduced his puppy to chickens, and the puppy was absolutely fine with those chickens, never tried to catch those chickens. When he replaced them with different chickens, it was a different story. The dog obviously hadn't predated on the original chickens, but it predated on the new chickens. So exposure to the trigger at the right time, when it was just about to develop that predatory chase sequence, meant that it saw chickens it wasn't familiar with as prey. We see that can happen quite often in dogs, that particularly with the predatory chase sequence, that's something that's hardwired in dogs. It's in there, it's innate, it's historical in their species. So if we take a dog and don't expose it to any fast-moving triggers throughout its early developmental period, we may inhibit the expression of predatory behaviour, but we may not, because it's such a hardwired behaviour. But certainly you have to have the right triggers in place at the right time for the expression of most behaviours that have a genetic component.
Predation is different from aggression, correct? It does involve different neural systems than defensive or fear-related aggression, isn't it?
Yeah, we do seem to have, there is still some evidence out there that suggests that true predation is different in terms of the motivators for the dog. It's different in terms of what's kind of happening inside the dog. Obviously, the end result for the thing being predated on is often fatal, so the end result of predation and aggression may look very similar, but there is some evidence to suggest that predatory behaviour and aggressive behaviour don't necessarily have the same roots, they don't have the same causes.
Can we really talk about breed-specific aggression? How dangerous can this belief be? Can this become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Breed-specific aggression is a very difficult one. There is no evidence that I am aware of that categorically states that one breed of dog is more dangerous than another breed of dog. One of the difficulties we've got when we're trying to assess the data is that there isn't a good source of data for things like bite statistics. So a lot of the data for bite statistics comes from hospitals. If I were to go into a room of dog trainers or dog people or even dog owners and just say, how many of you have been bitten? Quite a few of them will put up their hands. If I say, how many of you went to hospital? A lot of those hands would go down. And obviously, if you take a Chihuahua and a pit bull, big, powerful dog, little dog, actually the Chihuahua might be more likely to bite you, but you're going to end up in hospital if the pit bull bites you. So the data isn't really telling us very much. There are a lot of things that do contribute to biting behaviour. Breed is pretty low down on the list. There are other things that it would be better to focus on to reduce the risk of bites in dogs.
We can see this also from the UK that has a breed-specific legislation, and we know that the bite incidents have increased.
Absolutely. We do. The data, again, though, is a little bit inconclusive. So if we look at hospital data in the UK, it includes any injury caused by a dog. So it's called bites and strikes. So that might mean, you know, your big Labrador runs into your legs, knocks you over and you break your hip. That'll go in the same box on a hospital form as if you got bitten by a dog. It's an injury that's been caused by a dog. So that is one of the problems. We don't actually know how many of them are bites and how many of them are other things when we pull back the data. It's likely that most of them are bites. But again, we're looking at that skewed data when we try to consider exactly what it is. But certainly we do know that dog-related incidents that have ended up in hospital have increased. We've got some freedom of information from police forces. They are showing an increase in the incidents that they've dealt with involving dogs. So no, on the face of it, breed-specific legislation does not seem to have been particularly effective in reducing dog bite injuries in the UK.
Research suggests that early negative experiences can influence the development of aggression. How important are the first month of a dog's life in shaping later behavior?
They're absolutely crucial. Can't emphasise it enough. That a dog that is born with into an environment that's a home environment, we expect our dogs to live in homes, so they need to live in homes right from the beginning. It's no good having them in a barn or a shed or some kind of, you know, outside facility. Dogs need to be in homes. They need to be exposed in a positive way to experiences and things that they're going to encounter in later life. So not overwhelmed, not frightened by things, not, you know, chucked in at the deep end and expected to get on with it, but they should be introduced in a positive way to as many stimuli as possible, within reason, in that the dog has to get time to approach the stimuli, to interact with it in its own time, to be then given time to rest afterwards. All those things will contribute to producing a well-balanced and stable adult animal. And if you get that bit wrong at the beginning, it's not saying you can't end up with a well-behaved dog, but it's an awful lot harder.
So if we have a puppy with a sleep lead all day long hanging and check every time he does something that we don't like, or if we put it on a crate for hours crying and crying, it's not a very good start or beginning. It's
not at all.
Can the training methods we use with our dogs contribute to the development of the aggression?
There is some evidence that suggests that dogs trained with methods that are designed to cause fear or pain or startle may be more likely to develop aggressive behaviour. Although again, the science isn't precise. However, if we talk to qualified professionals, which again is something I did as part of my research, they tend to back up the idea that if you use aversive methods, you are more likely to increase or to produce aggressive responses in a dog. You're not teaching a dog what you want them to do if all you're doing is punishing them for doing something that you don't want them to do.
Some trainers trying to suppress aggressive behavior using punishment. From a science perspective, What are the risks of that approach?
Well, you've got to remember that behaviour doesn't happen for no reason. From the animal's point of view, that behaviour fills a purpose, does something useful. And if you just say, well, you can't do that behaviour, without working out why the dog is producing that behaviour, why is the dog behaving in a manner that you don't like? Well, there's a saying in nature abhors a vacuum, and basically your dog is just going to find something else to do instead of the behaviour that you are suppressing, because you haven't shown them an acceptable alternative. You haven't got to the root of the problem. If you suppress an aggressive behaviour, you run the risk of it just kind of getting bottled up, and sooner or later it may well explode out in a far worse way.
Is there evidence that suppressing warning signals like barking, growling, that may increase the risk of a sudden bite without warning?
Yeah, really, if you do that, you should take signals like growling as communication. So if your dog's growling at you, he's expressing discomfort. And if you punish him for growling, so he stops growling, you've taken away a rung of communication. So he's going to step up to the next rung. That might be snapping, or it might be biting. So if you don't listen to those early signals, your dog is just going to escalate the behaviour. So it is quite likely that if you punish early signals, then you may well end up with the dog just escalating, because its early signals have not been listened to. They've not had the effect he needs. So he has to escalate to get the desired effect from his perspective.
Dogs subjected to verbal or physical punishment were more likely to have a history of repeated aggression.
It seems likely. Again, the big thing when we're talking about dog training or how you interact with your dog, consistency seems to be key. So if sometimes you tell your dog off for getting on the sofa, but other days you invite him up for a cuddle, then that's inconsistent from his point of view. And again, we go back to that idea of frustration. So being inconsistent with your dog is more likely to result in an aggressive response because you frustrated him. Consistent punishment, it's consistent, but again, are you actually teaching the dog to do what you want, or are you just stopping the dog from doing what he feels he needs to do? I think any training mechanism that doesn't include an element of showing the dog what you want in place of what you don't want isn't helpful. But that idea of consistency is at the root of it.
If I remember correctly from your paper, dogs that were trained using a combination of positive reinforcement and positive punishment showed the highest mean aggression scores.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the idea of inconsistency. So sometimes they were punished, sometimes they were reinforced. So they didn't know when, they didn't really know what they were doing. So from the dog's perspective, that induces frustration, and you will see aggressive responses more likely.
What evidence exists that maternal environment can influence the development of aggression later in life through epigenetic mechanisms again?
There's a little bit of evidence out there, not a great deal, but we do have some evidence that suggests, not just in dogs, but in lots of different species, a dam that is, or a bitch that's going to have puppies, if they are stressed, then they seem to pass on stress responses to their offspring. There's been lots and lots of studies done on rodents about that, where stressed mothers will have stressed pups. There seems to be some changes in the neurology of puppies born to stressed mothers. You also, again, we come back to that idea of learning from the environment. So if the mother is stressed or unhappy, then that influences the way she behaves with her puppies. Those puppies that receive more maternal care, so more licking and grooming and maternal care from their mothers, seem to grow up to be better in terms of behavioural capabilities than dogs from mothers that don't give them that level of maternal care.
The quality of maternal care can have an influence on stress regulation and resilience.
Yes, absolutely.
And many people, influenced by a few social media videos where they see a very strict mother, they think that this is the norm.
Yeah, mothers are in some ways strict with their puppies. They will tell off their puppies if they're doing the wrong thing. And what people seem to get out of those videos is going, well, that's okay because we can do the same thing. They're not dogs. The dog knows you're not a dog. He knows I'm not a dog.
How often is aggressive behavior in dogs actually linked to underlying health problems like arthritis, hip dysplasia, spinal pain, ear infection?
That's a really interesting question. There's been quite a lot of research done, and it's kind of a big hot topic at the moment, that quite frequently dogs are very good at hiding pain. You can have dogs that have got hip dysplasia and they'll still go running around a field, but they are in pain, and you can understand that pain will make an animal somewhat defensive. Not only present pain, but also remembered pain. So if your dog's had a bad ear infection and it really hurt for you to touch his ears, that's gone now, but he's still got that memory that actually having his ears touched isn't a nice experience. So he will potentially react against it. So pain and unmanaged health conditions are a significant cause when we're thinking about what may be making dogs behave in an aggressive fashion.
Many people try to explain aggressive behavior only through operant conditioning. But behavior is far more complex than that. We know that hormones, neurophysiology, affective states, and the nervous system all play a role. So the four quadrants are only a very small part of the puzzle. Do you think that the dog training world oversimplifies aggression by focusing too much on operant conditioning?
Yes, possibly. Certainly, like I say, when we think about aggression, we can think of it as being, there's so many layers of aggressive behaviour, but if you don't find out what causes it, why the dog is behaving in that fashion, you can't just train on top of it. If you see what I mean? If you don't get down to the foundations, the causes of the behaviour, then trying to implement a training programme on the top, which as you say is looking at using those quadrants, operant conditioning quadrants, you're building on shaky foundations, if that makes sense. Dr. Susan Friedman is a great one for start at the bottom. Start with the nutrition, start with the environment, start with health, start with all of those things before you even get up as far as trying to think about training. Everything else should be in place first to give your dog the best chance.
So, to recap, if we want to reduce the likelihood of aggressive behavior, we need to pay attention to several factors like the parents, their environment, the prenatal environment of the mother, early rearing experiences, proper socialization, and training methods we use. Am I correct?
Yes, those things are all important. But one thing that we need to talk about is the owner. The owner of the dog is the one who is in charge of the dog's entire life. And if that owner isn't capable or willing to take responsibility for bringing that dog, treating that dog properly, isn't willing to provide the environment for that dog to thrive in, then no matter how well socialized, how well behaved, how well bred our dog is, if it ends up in an inappropriate environment with an inappropriate owner, then we see problems develop. So owners are a crucial part of the deal if we're trying to reduce dog aggression. We can't separate the dog from the owner. I often say to the people I teach that you might want to work with dogs, but dogs come with people. And the people are least as important as the dog. And one of the crucial things is, have you got the right dog for you? Have you just looked at the fluffy puppy and gone, that's nice, I'll have that one, without thinking about what kind of exercise is that dog going to need? Can you afford the vet bills so that that dog doesn't have any health issues? Are you going to be able to give the dog enough mental and physical stimulation and enough rest to be able to make sure that he develops into a well-rounded animal, and that will continue through his lifetime? Does
the owner personality influence the behavior of the dog?
Interestingly, there are some studies that suggest that dogs, because they're very tuned to our emotions, can often pick up on the personality of the owner. So if you have somebody who is very nervous and really worried about their dog behaviour, the dog starts to pick up on that, and it can work that way. So a confident but empathetic owner is kind of where you want to go. Not all dogs. Some dogs are very, very able to cope with, all sorts of different people and all sorts of different personality styles. But yes, the owner's personality can influence the behaviour of the dog.
Anne, thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your research and insights with us. It was a real pleasure having you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Ήταν άλλο ένα επεισόδιο του It's a Dog Friendly Podcast. Ελπίζω να σας άρεσε. Αν σας άρεσε, κάντε subscribe και ακολουθήστε μας για να δείτε και άλλα ενδιαφέροντα επεισόδια.